Alexander knew it was coming, and he had taught his men to trap the chariots.
It was a simple move that is still analyzed in tactical studies today. It's called the mousetrap.
No horse is going to come toward a bristling line of men with sharp, pointy sticks. So if you open a space, that horse will come into that space. He will be trapped. You can gut the horses, you can pull the charioteers down and kill them. And that's what he did.
In a sort of tactical judo, the Macedonians used the chariot's own momentum against them. Within minutes, the threat from the Persian chariots was neutralized, as was the weapon itself. The chariot would never be used again as a significant weapon of war. While the battle raged, Parmenio's left flank was under heavy attack and near collapse. On the other side of the battlefield, Alexander, curiously, was riding away from the fight. Parmenio desperately tried to contact Alexander to ask for reinforcements, but his message did not get through.
Battlefield communication in ancient warfare was primitive at best. They had trumpeters who would play a certain set of notes, and you would hear those set of notes and recognize it as a signal for your unit. And then the second set of notes that they would play would be what your unit is to do. You had drums whose beat could change, which would tell you that you need to increase the pace, or you need to turn left, or you need to turn right. It was very difficult, and it was probably very, very confusing. The fog of war and the rattle of battle was a literal problem in those days. Communication was tough.
As Parmenio struggled, Alexander and his cavalry continued to ride to the right, neither charging nor retreating. Darius's cavalry kept pace to prevent the Macedonians from attacking his flank.
Alexander angled his force farther and farther and farther off of the killing zone, and he actually went kind of out of the whole prepared field that Darius had set up for him, making Darius pull cavalry out of his line to keep from being outflanked. And as Darius pulled that cavalry out of his line, the line thinned out in the middle.
And as that happens, the center of the Persian line cannot shift left to cover the hole that's left. Alexander then spots the gap in the Persian line of battle.
Alexander's unorthodox approach to the battle had thrown the Persian army into disarray and opened a gap in their line. But could he exploit it?
Like all great field commanders, he feels the moment when that door opens.
El Dorado!
In one swift move, Alexander turned his entire cavalry 160 degrees and charged towards the gap in the Persian line. Finally, the hidden peltasts emerged and attacked the Persian horsemen with a hail of slings, javelins, and arrows, preventing them from pursuing Alexander and his cavalry.
I'm sure that from Darius's point of view, he must have been sitting there sending his scythe chariots out, sending his cavalry out, and just waiting for Alexander to be steamrollered over. And then suddenly he looked up, and there was Alexander's companion cavalry.
Alexander personally was at the apex of the cavalry wedge. In every battle, he was in harm's way.
Alexander and his cavalry charged into the gap, forcing their way through the line. The phalanx was the anvil. The cavalry was now the hammer. And the Persian infantry was caught between them. The Macedonian phalanx encountered no resistance. They charged forward. The Persian army broke and began to run. For Alexander, now that the Persian center had broken, a single goal remained: to find and kill Darius, the king of Persia. The Persian army was in disarray. Alexander had dented the might of the Persian Empire. But for his victory to be conclusive, he would have to kill the king.
The battle at Gaugamela was fought with the idea that Alexander would meet Darius mano a mano, one-on-one, kill him, mount his head on a cavalry spike.
Alexander realized that if you could cut the head off the snake, the rest of the snake would die.
But just as Alexander was within striking distance of the fleeing Darius, he stopped his pursuit. Alexander realized that Parmenian's troops were near collapse and would soon be overwhelmed. They needed his help. Alexander had to make a decision that might change the outcome of the battle: pursue Darius or save his troops.
El Dorado!
He made the smart decision. He turned, left Darius to flee, and saved his army. Alexander ran directly into a wall of confused soldiers falling to the rear.
There's no question that he was an active fighting commander who went in harm's way and reveled in it.
Alexander's rescue of Parmenio was one of the hardest fought parts of the battle. And the young commander suffered combat wounds as grave as those of his soldiers. For Alexander, the moment was bittersweet.
He rescued his left. He saved his army. And he won the battle at Gaugamela.
By the late afternoon, the battle was over, and the legend of Alexander the Great had begun.
For Alexander, the Battle of Gaugamela was, you might say, the final decisive battle. In fact, after this, Alexander begins to take for himself the titles of the Persian great king.
Alexander continued traveling east, conquering the rest of the Persian Empire, crossing the deserts of present-day Afghanistan to conquer the armies of India.
And the reason he kept going, I think, was that he just wanted to do things that nobody had ever done, to leave an undying fame and undying glory.
He never lost a battle. He was the most successful commander that we study in the Western world.
He was a brilliant tactician. He was a brilliant statesman. He was a charismatic individual that sort of exuded an aura about him of power.
If I were making the list of great commanders, I would put Alexander at the top. I truly think he deserves the title great.
Darius escaped into the surrounding mountains, only to be murdered within the year by one of his own generals. Alexander declared himself Lord of Asia. No one could deny him that title.
Alexander was great because he had such clarity in his goals. He managed to infect the people around him with such love for him and desire to accomplish his missions that it was a tidal wave of force that couldn't be stopped. And that's the mark of a great man.
The prophecy at Gordium turned out to be true. Alexander the Great's unusual strategies proved to be as effective against armies and empires as they were against the Gordian knot.
He was a heroic leader, and he led a heroic people. And in a world that did not believe in an afterlife, how else does one achieve immortality than by writing oneself into the history books? And in that regard, Alexander is immortal.
Alexander lived for only 6 more years after the Battle of Gaugamela. But by the time he died, aged 32, he had fought his way across 3 continents and conquered lands from Greece south to Egypt and east to India.